in the blister 2025. Georgia was in the grip of its worst drought in over a century. The sun baked the cracked soil, and the grass turned the color of bone. Lake Lanier, a massive, man-made reservoir north of Atlanta, had receded, more than 20 feet below normal. Long submerged tree stumps clawed at the sky, their dead fingers emerging like skeletons trying to escape a watery grave. Beaches expanded, old roads reappeared. Fishermen whispered about seeing rooftops just below the surface homes, schools, even gravestones. The ghost of a town, drowned decades ago, clawing its way back into the world. And then came the school. It was first spotted by a group of amateur drone hobbyists filming abandoned docks near the shrinking shoreline. The drone's camera caught a rusted yellow outline in a dried-out inlet, half sunk in mud and silt, buried beneath 30 feet of water until only weeks ago. The footage went viral by the time divers from the State Historical Society arrived. A crowd of curious onlookers had gathered, pressing against a makeshift police barrier. Cameras flashed. News vans parked on the dry lake bed. The bus's windows were caked with algae, but there was no mistaking what lay inside. Bones, tiny ones. Some of the windows were still sealed shut, smeared from the inside, as if little hands had clawed at the glass. Mallory Crane, a 24-year-old anthropology grad student, stood at the edge of the yellow police tape, staring. Her thesis was on submerged communities and the folklore they birthed. Lake Lanier was one of the richest sources of that folklore in the country, but this was something different, something darker. Her heart thundered in her chest as she watched a team in wetsuits pry open the bus doors. Then someone screamed. Not one of the divers. From the lake itself, a shrill, piercing child's scream, so loud and sudden, the birds scattered from the trees. And yet, no children were there. The crowd fell, deathly silent. People exchanged uneasy glances. Even the officers seemed rattled. One deputy crossed himself. Mallory took a step forward, ignoring the warning shouts from the officers. Something in her gut twisted, not fear, not exactly, but a sense of awakening. The lake was giving something back, something that didn't want to be found. That night, Mallory couldn't sleep. She kept hearing it, that scream, not in her ears, but in her memory. It rang out, over and over again, like a needle stuck on the groove of a broken record. She sat in the motel room just off Highway 53, blinds drawn, the blue glow of her laptop screen casting shadows across the wallpaper. Her fingers trembled slightly as she replayed the drone footage on loop. The video was just grainy enough to keep her imagination filling in the gaps. There, just beneath the algae-blackened windows, movement. Mallory paused the video, zoomed in. There was a shape-distorted humanoid, but it didn't quite look like a body, not anymore. She leaned in closer to the screen. The shape was small, hunched, and clinging to the back window of the bus. It had no eyes, just empty sockets. The face was twisted in a grin too wide for a child's skull, and where she hadn't noticed it before, but the timestamp on the footage showed the shape, moving between frames, moving, watching. Her heart kicked. Jesus, she whispered, pushing the chair back. She slammed the laptop shut and rubbed her arms. Suddenly cold, despite the thick summer heat pressing against the windows. The room felt wrong, heavy, like it was holding its breath. That's when the tap started, a soft knock from the bathroom. Mallory turned her head slowly. Her room was empty. She hadn't even unpacked. The bathroom door stood ajar, the mirror catching a sliver of the bed's reflection. Knock. Louder now. She stood, each step toward the bathroom, feeling like she was wading through syrup. When she reached the door, she pressed her palm against it. "Hello?" she whispered. Silence. She eased it open. Nothing but a cramped shower, peeling wallpaper, and a rust-stained sink. Mallory stared into the mirror. Behind her, reflected faintly, was the shape of a child. She spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She rushed back, grabbed it. A new message. Unknown number. You heard Snow? You'll listen, Mallory. S. Breath caught in her throat. Another message popped in. Go back to the water the next morning. She stood alone on the edge of Lake Lanier. The crowds were gone. The bus had been cordoned off, and armed deputies now kept a watch around the perimeter. But her press badge from the university and a half-lie about environmental research got her close enough. She crouched beside the dried bank and listened. The lake was whispering, not the lapping of water, not wind in the trees. This was deep, faint, layered like overlapping recordings, speaking in broken sentences, many of them too fast to catch. Help, left us, not sleeping, under the bus. Then one voice came clear, not a whisper, a shriek, let us out. Mallory fell back, scrambling up the bank. Her ears rang. The water churned, then stilled, and far across the lake. From the shadows beneath the bridge, she saw them, dozens of pale, childlike figures standing ankle-deep in the water, their faces turned toward her, watching, waiting. The local legend had always blamed the bridge, the Lanier Bridge accident of 1958. A bus carrying elementary school children careened off the edge during a late-night field trip returned from Atlanta. Poor visibility, no guardrails, a wrong turn. Bodies were never recovered until now. But something about it had never sat right with Mallory. She dove back into the archives. Newspaper clippings, microfilm reels, faded photographs, no obituaries for the children, no names, only one name, ever, repeated. Robert Wendell, the bus driver, a decorated veteran, local churchgoer, no known family. Mallory found a yellowed clipping from the Gainesville Times dated October 10, 1958. It featured a black and white photo of Wendell beside the school bus stop. He looked off. Wrong. His face was almost too still, like someone had told him how to smile and he hadn't quite gotten the hang of it. Then she noticed something else. Behind Wendell in the photo was the edge of the bus, and on the back window, pressed to the glass, a small handprint. Clear, greasy, smudged. It wasn't there by accident. Mallory drove to the last known address listed for Wendell, a crumbling farmhouse on the outskirts of Dawsonville, long since abandoned. The mailbox was rusted shut, but someone recently had nailed a crude wooden cross to the porch. Inside, the house was a mausoleum. Dust 3 inches thick, old furniture sheeted and mold-eaten. But someone had lived there long after the original family was gone. She found candles, burnt offerings, Bible pages shredded and soaked in blackened water, and in the back room, what looked like an altar. The walls had been painted with dozens of names, all in red chalk: Jessica, Mason, Darla, Reggie, Tommy, Faith. Children's names. Above them, a single phrase scrawled again and again. I drove them to safety. I drove them to safety. I drove them to safety. Over and over. Mallory snapped photos. Every hair on her arm stood on end as she stepped back to leave. The air changed. The temperature dropped, and then she heard it. The soft hiss of a hydraulic door opening behind her. She turned. The school bus was in the hallway. Impossible. Too large to fit through the house. But there it was, rusted yellow, wet, pulsing with rot and lake scum. The door creaked open. Inside, the same dead rows of empty seats, but in the back, seated upright in the driver's chair, was Robert Wendell. His head snapped toward her, bones cracking. His eyes were hollow, leaking lake water. Mallory, he rasped. How do you know you're the last stop? The door slammed shut. Mallory awoke in her car. She was parked near the lake again, keys in the ignition, clothes soaked, mud caked under her nails, and in the back seat her camera. The photos she'd taken were gone, all except one. It was a new image, a close-up of her own face, asleep in the car, and behind her, just visible in the reflection of the rear window, a child's face, grinning wide, with black, empty sockets, with black, empty sockets. Mallory and shoved a towel under the crack of her apartment door. Sleep became impossible. She could still feel the weight of the water pressing in on her lungs, taste the mildew on her tongue. Something had come back with her from that house, or maybe from the lake, that night. As she tried to piece together the events from Wendell's house, she reviewed the one photo left on her camera. She zoomed in on the child's face reflected in her backseat window. The sockets were pitch black, but when she enhanced the contrast, she saw something else: teeny silhouettes. Dozens of them, crowding behind the child in the glass. Not just one ghost, a busload the next day. She got a call from Braden, one of the divers from the search crew. His voice was trembling. "Something's happening. We kept hearing it through the comms, like screaming, kids, but muffled, and bubbles. I thought it was the pressure, but we went back down." His voice cracked. The bus had moved. Mallory's blood went cold. "What? The bus is gone? It's not where we left it." They met at the emergency dive trailer near the edge of the lake. Braden was pale, shivering despite the July heat. He showed her the underwater drone feed. The wreck had vanished from its previous GPS tag. But then, 20 feet away, something new. A fresh cavity in the silt. Not natural erosion. Not ROCKSLIDE. Tunnel. Dug by hand. The drone light illuminated crude wooden walls, faded red lockers, rusted pipes, a ceiling vent. Mallory recognized it immediately. "That's a school hallway." Braden nodded, sick to his stomach. "We think it's part of the original Osborne Elementary, the school that was demolished and sunk when Lake Lanier was flooded. And then he showed her the final clip. The drone came to a set of double doors. Cafeteria still faintly visible on the plaque. As the drone approached, the screen cut to static, and something with long, jointless arms and dripping black robes slithered past the lens before it died. Mallory knew what had to be done. The history of Lake Lanier had been whitewashed, paved over, and drowned. But beneath that calm surface, the past had festered. She returned to the local archives, pulled the original construction plans for the dam. Deep in the contractor's notes, she found it. Confirmation that Osborne Elementary was never fully demolished. They'd flooded it in place to save money. Buried the history. Buried the truth. And now, that truth wanted out. That night, her faucet began to run on its own. Water pooled across her bathroom floor. Thick and brown and reeking of rot. She turned off the valve, but the sound continued from the kitchen, the tub, the toilet. Voices echoing through the pipes, children screaming, crying for their parents, others singing nursery rhymes, off-key and slow, like a scratched record. She backed into her bedroom and stopped cold. The floor was wet, soaking wet, and in the corner, a child was standing, drenched, pale, his mouth open in a silent scream. Water flowed from his eyes. "Miss," he croaked. "You forgot us." Then he lunged. She awoke gasping, drenched in her own bed, wrists bruised as if from struggling. Her bedroom was bone dry, but her phone had a new voicemail. No number, just static. And then, "You're next." Then, the screech of wet brakes, and the slam of school bus doors opening. ULY 2025, Buford Dam Road, Georgia. The sun rose over Lake Lanier, but its light seemed to bounce off the water, wrung to dull, to gray, like it was filtering through an old bruise. Mallory hadn't slept. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the hiss of air brakes and the crunch of gravel beneath phantom wheels. She couldn't take it anymore. The lake was calling, and she needed answers. She drove to the southern shore, where the old town of Oscarville had once stood before the flooding of 1956. According to the historian she'd contacted, Osborne Elementary had been just a quarter-mile from the church before it was submerged. The original foundation, some brick, some wood, had never been removed. The school had sunk with desks, chalkboards, Even its school bus still parked in the underground garage. That bus was now moving. And it was Chris. Mallory met up with Braden and the diver crew again at the cove. They had brought more tech, submersible drones, sonar, cameras. Everyone was tense. One diver had already dropped out after claiming he'd seen a child swim backward into the blackness of the trench and smile. Braden pulled Mallory aside. "Something's wrong with the water. It's heavier, tastes like metal and old blood. The fish are gone. There's a hum beneath the surface, like a whisper." He didn't have to explain further. She could hear it too now. Voices, children, singing a slow, broken melody. The wheels on the bus go round and round. Into the ground, ... Into the ground, ... They sent the drone down through the trench, past rotting desks, decayed textbooks, the janitor's skeleton half embedded in lakebed silt, deeper, through a warped hallway where lockers hung open like mouths. Then they found it. The school bus ... tilted at an angle. Doors half open. Lights blinking red in slow intervals like a dying heartbeat. One of the divers whimpered in Mallory's headset. "Oh God, the windows. Look at the windows." The drone light swept along the side. Inside sat children, their skeletons soaked in black moss, still in rows. But their heads turned in unison, bones creaking underwater, to look at the camera. One child reached forward, her jaw unhinged wide. Bubbles burst from her eye sockets. "We never made it home." Suddenly, the signal cut. A screech of static. Then something else. The sound of bus doors opening. Mallory ran from the shoreline behind her. The lake boiled. Bubbles surged as something massive shifted below the surface. Then, tires. Two worn, rubber wheels broke through the water, followed by a rusted yellow grille and shattered headlights. The bus was rising. It rolled forward as if pulled by invisible hands, water sloshing from every window. A soaked stop sign extended with a metallic clunk. The wipers, broken for decades, screeched back and forth, like fingernails on a mirror. Then the doors creaked open. Inside sat a driver, but he wasn't human anymore. His flesh was bloated, green-gray, lips peeled back to reveal blackened gums. His driver's badge read Daniel Morth, the man who'd driven Osborne Elementary's Route 6 back in 1956. The man who'd disappeared with 23 children when the waters rose without warning during construction. He turned his head toward Mallory. His voice gurgled from a waterlogged throat. "We still got room." Mallory backed away, heart pounding. From the trees behind her came footsteps, sweat, slapping bare feet. She turned and saw them, children soaked, eyes hollow. Dozens of them. They came. From the lake, from the woods, from behind her car. She was surrounded, and every one of them whispered the same thing. "All aboard." The driver leaned forward. "Just need one more to finish the route." Mallory shook her head, trembling. "I didn't forget you. I came back to tell your story. I know what they did to you. You were buried under their greed." The children froze. Some looked at each other, others began to cry. Then a low rumble shook the ground. The bus screamed. Not the engine, the metal, the bones inside. The damned it reversed, tires screeching on the wet ground, and rolled slowly back into the lake. The driver's hollow gaze never broke from Mallory's. His face sank below the surface. Last, and silence returned. She collapsed to her knees, alive, but not alone. In her hand, wet and bloated, was a small student ID card. Marcus J. Elliott, age 9, Osborne Elementary, 1956. It hadn't been there before. She published the full story the next day. Every photo, every drone recording, the truth about the flooded town, the school, the cover dash up. The footage went viral. Investigations were launched. The lake was declared a paranormal hazard zone. They drained a section of Lake Lanier. 6 months later, they found no school bus, but they did find something else. A perfectly preserved row of child-sized footprints leading up from the old road to the shore and vanishing into the woods. The screaming stopped, for the first time in what felt like hours. Silence reigned over Lake Lanier. No bubbling cries from the depths, no distorted voices whispering from the bones of sunken things. The air was still, like the lake was holding its breath. Cole gasped on the muddy shore, clothes clinging to his skin, lungs burning. He had barely escaped. Somewhere behind him, the wreck of the bus sat like a monument to horror beneath the water. The twisted remains of metal and memory now still again, but something told him it wasn't over. Not yet. He wasn't alone. From the trees, he heard a crunching footsteps on brittle pine needles. Cole. The voice was wrong. It sounded like Ashley, but it carried a distortion, as though spoken through radio static. Or underwater. He turned. Soaked and shivering. Out from the woods walked Ashley. But she was different. Her eyes were jet black, like glass marbles. Her skin had the waxy pallor of something long dead, pulled from the lake bottom. Her movements weren't smooth, more like jolted flickers, as if time lagged around her. "You came back," she said, voice vibrating unnaturally. "You were always meant to." Cole stumbled back, tears brimming in his eyes. "You're not her. I am what's left," she whispered. What the water kept. Behind her, more figures emerged, dripping, broken. Some in tattered 1950s clothing, some missing limbs, others with wide, water-bloated faces, hair tangled with algae and lake rot. All of them were children. All of them had eyes like ink. "You heard us," said a boy in suspenders, bones jutting from his chest. "You woke us." "We've waited so long," said another, with silt pouring from her mouth. They began to surround him. Cole tried to run, but his legs refused. The water was in him now, inside him, in his ears, in his mind, whispering in that dreadful chorus, "Bring us back. Bring us home. Let them know." His vision blurred. Weeks later, Lake Lanier was closed to the public. Again, local news cited a toxic algae bloom and a diving accident, but the community knew better. Rumors ran wild. Screams heard at night. A ghostly yellow bus that appeared near the surface during foggy mornings. Divers going missing. Phone recordings filled with whispers, always children's voices, always just out of range. Cole was never found. But sometimes, on certain nights, hikers say they see him standing at the lake's edge, soaked, shivering, reaching toward the water with outstretched arms. And in the lake, when the moon is right and the wind is wrong, you might hear the bus engine turn over. Then the screaming begins again. Then the screaming begins again.